think that Trump's a reaction to three specific forces: anti-establishment feeling, anti-political correctness feeling, and a sort of anti-Americanism.
Welcome to the Jamie Weinstein Show.
I'm your host, Jamie Weinstein. Every week, I interview the biggest names in politics, business, and media to glean some of the lessons they learned on their various roads to success. I also get them to open up on the most important issues of the day. So come along with me. We'll have some fun and hopefully learn something while we're at it. Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Jamie Weinstein Show. This episode represents the first of 3 episodes I recorded in Los Angeles last week, and it is with Ben Shapiro, a guy that I doubt needs much of an introduction to this audience. But before we get to Ben, I want to remind everybody about the charitable endeavor I announced on Monday. I will be giving $2 away for each 5-star review I receive on iTunes through the election cycle, up to 2,000 reviews or $4,000, half of which will go to the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation, a charity that is near and dear to my heart because CF took the life of my brother about 15 years ago. The other half going to a charity suggested by the audience. So if you have a very good and noble charity that you think should be considered, please email me, go to jamieweinstein.com and send that along to me. And at the end of this little charitable endeavor, I will choose one of those charities suggested by the audience for the other half of the money. But most importantly, go to iTunes, rate the show, give us a 5-star rating, listen to the show, tell your friends to listen to the show, have them rate the show, and let's get those 2,000 reviews so I can give the maximum amount away to 2 very worthy charities. So I hope that we can accomplish that. And please also continue to interact with me on Twitter. Go to Jamie_Weinstein and go to JamieWeinstein.com to email me. Let me know what you think of the show, what guests you'd like to see, what questions you'd like me to ask guests that I announce that we will be having. I ask some Twitter questions during this episode, and I try to do that almost every episode. So please keep interacting with the show. Now to Ben Shapiro. Ben was a teenage political commentator. He got started in this business 15 years ago as a 17-year-old. He is something of a wonderkind. He went to Harvard Law. He wrote several books already on many different political topics. Even before he was a Harvard Law student, he was writing books. He is involved in politics in every way you can imagine. He famously left the Breitbart News earlier in the campaign season over the incident that occurred with my fiance, Michelle Fields, and Corey Lewandowski. When Michelle left, so did Ben over how Breitbart handled the situation. Ben is a ardent never Trumper, but also an ardent never Hillary person. He is editor-in-chief of the Daily Wire. He has his own podcast in the field of political punditry. He basically inhabits every medium that exists. We talk about a lot of issues on the podcast, everything from how Donald Trump won the Republican primary to where the Republican Party will go if Donald Trump loses in November, to Breitbart, what will happen after the election if Donald Trump doesn't win with Breitbart. Will there be a Trump TV? And every question in between. A lot of Ben's influences, how he got started into politics, what advice he would give to an aspiring young pundit. So I think you're going to really enjoy this episode. Even if you disagree with Ben, he's a really smart guy and has a lot of insight that I think everyone can learn from. So without further ado, I give you Mr. Ben Shapiro. Ben, thanks for joining the Jamie Weinstein Show.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Let's begin with Donald Trump, of course.
Why not?
Yeah, as every conversation starts in the conservative world these days.
Every conversation period starts that way. Yeah. I wake up in the morning and I turn to my wife and she says, "How about that Trump?" And that's how it works.
So, what is your general impression? What does Donald Trump's nomination tell us about the Republican Party?
I mean, it tells us there's a large level of dysfunction. I think that it's a combination of. I think Obama trolled the Republican Party into nominating the worst possible candidate. I understand why people were enraged. I understand the motivating factors behind getting behind Trump. I think that Trump's a reaction to three specific forces: anti-establishment feeling, anti-political correctness feeling, and a sort of anti-Americanism. So Obama's kind of anti-American in terms of how he speaks about American exceptionalism, and Trump comes along and says, make America great again, and people resonate to that. He appeared to be the most angry
Which
guy
is
on the
ironic,
stage.
by the way, because he's actually made more anti-American statements more than anti-American exceptionalism statements more than Obama ever has.
Certainly Trump was not the best informed choice, because he's not anti-political correctness either, obviously. He's just anti-decency. And when it comes to, anti-establishment, he's not anti-establishment. I mean, the guy's a career Democrat who has worked with members of both parties and given money to members of both parties, and wasn't really going to fundamentally reshape anything in Washington, D.C. He's a power player in real estate and in the business world. He's a crony capitalist of the highest order. So we nominated the person who's wrong to take on these issues, but he was the loudest and the angriest. And so that in a really crowded field where everybody was strategically misplaying their hand, that worked out to his benefit. I mean, you get $2 billion of free media coverage helps. But I think a lot of mistakes have been made on all sides of the aisle. I think that if you were to break down the Republican Party into sort of establishment, conservative, and ardent Trump people, because right now there are a lot of people voting for Trump who aren't ardent about it. He's just a candidate. You vote for him. But if you broke it down into that division, if you're talking about establishment, conservative, and Trumpkin, then everybody's made mistakes. The establishment made a huge mistake by telling conservatives and Republicans and people all over the country, we're going to stop Obama dead in his tracks. We promise you we're going to stop everything he's doing. And then they didn't. And people got angry. So they overpromised, they underdelivered. And the conservatives sinned, and I'm part of this. I think a lot of us in the conservative movement are part of this, by acting as though every hill that was worthy of fighting on was also worthy of dying on, meaning that it wasn't just that everything is bad, it's that everything is at the ultimate crisis point, and if we don't stop it right now, the world ends. And so that leads to this kind of panic. Okay, who's the guy who's the most famous, has the biggest name recognition, is the angriest, will fight the hardest? And so, that was a mistake. It's possible to be urgent without being alarmist, and I think that we have to be careful about that in the future. And then for the Trump people, I think, who are really ardent about Trump, I think that a lot of those people have been misinformed about what Trump is. I think a lot of them didn't pay attention. I think that Trump plays a role on TV that he isn't in real life or in real politics. And it doesn't behoove people to make decisions about politics in anger. Decisions made in anger are typically not good decisions anyway, but on politics, they certainly are.
Does it make you question whether the Republican base, the conservative movement, whether the people that, I wrote columns to, you wrote columns to, actually believe in conservatism, believe in anything?
I think they believe in some of the conservative policies. I think they believe in some of the conservative language with regard to political correctness. But I think that the idea that we had, which is that everybody who's conservative knows who John Locke is, or everybody who's conservative understands what the Constitution actually says, as opposed to some of the sloganeering about the Constitution, that's a very deep gloss on what a lot of voters do. Most people who consider themselves conservative are conservative because they don't like, as I say, political correctness or the establishment. They don't like the idea of the government taking more money out of their pocket. But most people don't spend all day thinking about politics. I mean, you do, I do, and so we sort of assume that everybody does, and everybody talks about politics all the time. I mean, it must be, my wife is a doctor, and I've said to her before that, imagine if your life was every dinner party you ever went to, everyone thought they knew more about doctoring than you did, right? You spend your entire life going to medical school and caring for patients, and then somebody comes in and feels like they have to give you a basic lecture about what cancer is. Everybody feels they know a lot about politics because politics surrounds us. But the truth is there are a lot of people who spend real time studying this stuff and so have a real ideological consistency and philosophical grounding for what they believe. And then there are a lot of people who vote the way they vote because they agree on particular issues. And politics is the art of coalition building, assuming the people who read your columns agree with you on everything as opposed to the things that they like about you is a mistake. I think that we've given voters in that way, on all sides, I think a little bit too much credit for thinking through basic political philosophy. I don't think most people have.
Let me follow up on you mentioned the conservative media like you and I and other things are part to blame. And let me read a theory that comes from someone who's not a conservative. I guess he was nominally a Republican, Josh Barrow at Business Insider. Yeah. His theory was the problem is that Republicans have purposely torn down the validating institutions. They've convinced voters that media cannot be trusted. They've gotten them used to ignoring convenient facts about policy. And they have abolished standards of discourse by allowing all complaints about offensiveness to be lumped into a box called political correctness and ignored. So I guess the basic point he's making
is
that,
some truth to that.
That, we would say CNN's liberal and media's liberal, and to an extent that's true, but it got to the point that nothing they can show that Donald Trump is lying about, people will believe.
So look, that's the media's fault. I mean, they discredited themselves over the last 30 years by basically saying the same things about Mitt Romney that they say about Donald Trump, and they cry wolf about Romney, and then they say the exact same things about Trump, and they expect us all to just go, oh, well, I guess now it's true that you're saying it about Trump. I mean, you can't do that. You can't discredit yourself for years and years and years by lying and then expect that everybody's going to believe you when you finally tell the truth about a candidate. And the great irony of this election cycle is a lot of the things the media have said about Trump are true. A lot of those things are true, and a lot of things conservative media have said about Trump are actually not true, but that's a reversal of the roles. My feeling is that the failure of responsibility is not in ripping down the media. I think ripping down the media, the left media, or at least exposing their biases, is a worthwhile goal. But then you have to replace that with something that tells the truth, not something that panders for ratings, or something that is based on sort of the notion that that your wishful thinking is reality. This election cycle has been very ugly for a lot of people who actually care about what's true and what's false and want to say things that are true as opposed to just shilling. And that's why people who are, people who say, I don't like Trump, I don't like Hillary, and I'll say what I think about Trump is wrong, have been bashed as helping Hillary, because we've now fallen into this team sport. It's not about true and false anymore. It's about the left media lies, so why can't we lie for our guy? Why don't we become them, except we'll be on the right? So, to that extent, I sort of agree with Barrow that the media say true things now. We don't believe them because we rip down the media. But that's the media's fault that we rip them down, less about us ripping them down. As far as there's a second point that he makes there that I'm trying to recall that isn't about the media, but political correctness. I've said that myself. Okay, the idea that we have now mixed up saying offensive, stupid things for being politically incorrect is one of the great tragedies of this election cycle. Being politically incorrect means saying useful things. It means saying things that are true, but people don't want you to say because it offends. Right, saying things like single motherhood is apt to create more crime. Right, people don't like that because it offends single mothers and people who are associated with single moms and kids of single moms. But it's true, and we have to say it because otherwise we can't change public policy. It is not politically incorrect to say Mexican judges can't judge cases. That's just you being a jerk, and so we mixed up the two, and that's why and you see what Trump does it too, because he's not a smart man. Number one, and number two, it justifies his cause. Every time he'd say something truly terrible, he'd immediately come out and say, well, I just don't want to be politically correct. And it's like, no, that you're not being politically correct. I'm just asking you not to be a jerk. There is a difference. Yeah.
And I guess there's one more angle to Trump's rise, and that conservatives have to deal with is, was Trump's rise a product of his policies, or was it a product, do you think, more of his personality and brand? In other words, does his immigration position, does his trade position, is that something that resonated, or did they resonate only because of who it came from, a guy who's considered the great businessman, or at least the way he painted himself?
On this one, I'm very solidly on the side of his brand and his personality. And the reason I say that is because Pat Buchanan ran on exactly the same platform in 1992 and won one state. And the idea that you run against trade and therefore you're going to win broad swaths of the electorate, like the electorate cares deeply about NAFTA or TPP. I mean, these are fringe issues for most people. Yeah. They matter to some people who are in Rust Belt states. It's sad to me that that both parties have now abandoned free trade because it's politically convenient to do so, because free trade is a good, it is not a bad. But the reality is that, again, all politics is coalitional, and the reason that Rust Belt blue-collar workers used to vote Republican had far less to do with trade policy and much more to do with taxes and more to do also with kind of basic social standards and social policy. What's amazing in this election is that social policy has gone completely by the wayside because the establishment actually got the perfect candidate for them, except that he's Trump. If you strip the personality from Trump and you look at his platform, he doesn't care about social issues. He's basically ignored them the entirety of the election cycle. On taxes, he's got, he wants to lower taxes, but he also wants to close loopholes and target Wall Street. When it comes to foreign policy, he's an isolationist. He's not an involved, hawkish Reagan conservative. His policies are much more in line with what establishment people on the coasts like than it is with some guy living in Wisconsin who cares about whether his kid has to go pee next to a transgender kid.
On this, I agree with you entirely. Have you ever met Trump?
No, I haven't.
Oh, and who did you support in the primary?
I supported Cruz, and then secondarily, I supported Rubio.
And on Breitbart, when you were writing kind of pieces that were not in favor of Trump, what was the pushback like? Was there a deep pushback?
Not a lot of pushback when I was there. I mean, I was sort of the token anti-Trump guy. And I started off this election cycle open to Trump. I mean, I wrote a column in 2011 where I talked about why I thought he'd make a very good candidate, actually. It was called The Magic of Donald Trump. I get hit with this thing all the time now because, you switched on Trump. Right, I saw more evidence. This is what happens when you see more evidence. And if you even read my stuff early in the campaign cycle about Trump, I said he's bringing to light some issues. He's doing some things that are probably good for the Republican Party. He provides a useful contrast for some of the other candidates. And then as he gradually got worse and worse, it became this is now beyond the point of being redemptive. This is now just a negative. I mean, I said, I think it was my very first column this cycle about Trump. I called him a hammer in search of a nail, and I said sometimes he hits a nail and sometimes he hits a baby. And as we moved further along in the election cycle, he stopped hitting nails and started hitting babies almost exclusively.
Do you think, there was that BuzzFeed report that Trump funds Breitbart. Did you buy that?
No, I don't. I never saw any evidence of that, and having no evidence, I wouldn't want to speculate on it. I know that. Listen, I mean, he works closely with the Mercers, and I think the Mercers fund Breitbart from public reporting. So,
do you think that post this election, assuming Donald Trump loses, that we will see a Breitbart Trump collaboration in some sort of Trump TV?
I would be shocked if we don't. I'd be shocked if we don't. Bannon will do some sort of documentary like he always does about Trump. It won't be very good, just like all of Bannon's other crappy hagiographies. And then we'll move on to a broader project. I think that's Steve Bannon does not play games where there are losing solutions. And for Bannon, joining up with Trump was always a winner, because if Trump wins, he's chief of staff and I'm preparing for my IRS audit. And if Trump loses, then Bannon is preparing for a new business plan with Donald Trump as the head. Remember, all Trump has to do is draw a few 100,000 people, and he's going to get, in this election cycle, 60 million votes. All he has to do is if he draws 1 million subscribers paying $10 a month, he clears $120 million a year gross. I mean, that's a lot of money for any new startup.
And does what happens to Breitbart? Does Breitbart just disappear?
No, I think Breitbart remains. I think that Breitbart continue. I mean, look, they have massive traffic now because they've glommed onto Trump and ridden him all the way to traffic and ratings glory. I think that what you see is Trump TV, a joint project with Breitbart, basically. And I don't know and I would assume they started basically as an OTT. They started as an online network because that means they don't have to buy in digital. If they're working with Roger Ailes, they can't buy into broadcast because Ailes, I think, has contract provisions that prevent him from competing with Fox. He doesn't have to compete with Fox. All he has to, and he doesn't have to do a 24-hour network, right? That's a lot of work and that's a lot of cost. All he has to do is a 4-hour network, and it's Laura Ingraham, and it's Milo Yiannopoulos, and it's Trump just stopping. He doesn't have to have a show. He just stops by as a guest on all these things, and he hires a few relatively prominent names and then some not so prominent names, and then midnights with Bill Mitchell and his poll expertise.
I'd watch that, actually.
Who wouldn't watch that? I mean, I think that'd be the best thing on the network.
Yeah. Since leaving Breitbart, you have, according to this new Twitter report that was put out by the Anti-Defamation League, you got maybe half of all anti-Semitic tweets, somewhere around there.
Something 38, 40%, yeah.
What has that been like, and what do you think Twitter should do, if anything?
So I don't think Twitter should do anything. I'm in favor of people being able to say what they want to say so long as they're not explicitly advocating violence. That doesn't make life easy on me necessarily, because that means that my entire Twitter feed has been filled with anti-Semitic memes and crap for months. I will say that I did not advocate, and I still don't think that Twitter should have banned Milo, who I think is a scuzzbag of a human being, but I think that Twitter shouldn't have banned him. I will say that when Milo was banned, the amount of anti-Semitism in my feed dropped by at least 50% immediately, because that's sort of the group he runs with and was incentivizing, because Milo has this kind of trumped up, no pun intended, this kind of rage against me. He sees me as a target, so that's fine. I don't care. But yeah, I mean, it's not fun when the day your kid is born, you get hit with 100 tweets saying you should all go to the gas chambers. By the way, on the day my kid was born, Milo sent me a picture of a black kid because I'm a cuck, right? Because my wife must have had sex with a black guy. So it's none of that is particularly fun. But screw them. Jew haters are mouth breathing morons, and if they feel the necessity to do this, that's their prerogative, I suppose. I like exposing them. Milo likes to pretend that these are a bunch of mischievous, trolly people. But as I've said before, if I can't tell the difference between your tweet and David Duke's, that's your fault, not mine.
Is this an organized campaign, you think? Some of these bots, or do you?
Yeah, some of these are definitely bots. I don't think all of them are bots, but I think
who's organizing it yet? You think?
All I can say is that the indicators of an organized campaign are there, meaning there are spikes when it happens. They circulate around certain events as opposed to other events. They cascade on each other, so it starts and there's a big wave. So it's not like just a steady stream of drip, drip, drip every so often. It just comes in big way. And as I say, when Milo was ousted, when Ricky Vaughn was ousted, the anti-Semitism in my Twitter feed has gone down 95%.
I don't want to spend too much time on Milo, but since you raised him, he's built up this brand where you see these articles where he's spending $1 million a year on staff. It just seems
he ain't doing it based on his Breitbart salary, unless Breitbart has wildly inflated their salaries.
It seems like this is a completely made up kind of image he's created, and reporters are just reporting uncritically these numbers that he gives him.
Well, I mean, as I say, again, if he's doing his speeches on campuses for free, and he is doing his work for Breitbart, I can't imagine for enormous money, because that's not what Breitbart pays. So if he's spending $1 million a year on staff, then it ain't coming from. It's not because he's a highly successful political commentator. It's coming from somewhere else.
Yeah. Has your anti-Trump kind of position harmed your brand in any way? Harmed your career in any way?
Well, I mean, it's harmed me fiscally. I mean, I think that people who have taken an anti-Trump position on the right. One of the great ironies is all the Trump people saying, "You've been bought. You've been bought." Okay, I've lost at least 6 figures in this election cycle because I refused to stand by Trump. Right? I mean, I lost a fair bit of chunk of change when I left Breitbart, obviously. And then there have been other situations where I've had speeches booked that have been canceled because I'm anti-Trump. So that's, that's silly talk. I think that you're fighting a headwind when 80% of your party wants to do something and you don't really want to do that. Then obviously that's not something that's a business decision. That's a decision that's made based on a different risk calculation or different principles. As far as what it's done to my brand, I mean, I don't really care. Meaning that for me the question is, what's the right thing to do in my own view, morally and politically. I'm not ripping people who vote for Trump to stop Hillary Clinton. I totally understand that logic. I have thoughts about it myself on a very regular basis. But for me, my brand, whatever brand it is, my brand has been built around the idea that I'm going to tell you the truth and I'm not going to fib. I'm not going to tell you that Trump is winning when he's losing. I'm not going to tell you he's great when he sucks. I'm not going to tell you that Hillary Clinton is not going to be a disaster. I'm not going to soft pedal her and pretend that she's not going to be awful. She will be. And if you can't handle that, there are plenty of other places that will tell you differently. You can subscribe to Laura Ingram's website, or you can watch Sean Hannity's show, and they'll tell you everything that you want to hear, and you'll feel good up until November 9th, at which point you might feel a little bit jobbed because it turns out a lot of that stuff wasn't true.
A Twitter question, when you were coming on, I put it out to Twitter. I think you retweeted it from a gentleman named J.D. Saver. Why is Ben not promoting or supporting Evan McMullin?
So the only reason that I'm not promoting or supporting Evan McMullin is because he's not on the ballot in 50 states. So I'll be honest with you. I haven't spent a lot of time researching into Evan McMullin. I'm not sure he's on the ballot in California, so I can't vote for him.
I don't think he is.
So there's that. If Evan McMullin had made the ballots in all 50 states, I'd be looking much more seriously at him. I also have to say I was never in favor of running a third-party candidate against Trump and Hillary, specifically because I think that it minimizes the amount of resistance to Trump that there is, because then they say, well, McMullin got 5 votes. That shows that there were 0 of you, right? Which is not true. Just because you don't vote for McMullin doesn't mean that you weren't anti-Trump. So there's that. Also, I don't think that it's worthwhile for a third-party candidate to bear responsibility for Trump's loss. If the person doesn't have a legitimate shot at winning, I'm not in favor of running that third-party candidate as a general rule. It then just becomes sucking votes away from people who have a legit shot of winning, and I just don't see what the point of that is, other than to register displeasure, and I can register displeasure by not voting.
Oh, is that what your plan is?
My plan is to not vote at the top of the ticket. I'll vote every place else, just not at the top.
And one theme of this show is what happens after the election in November, assuming Donald Trump loses, as it looks like will be the case right now. What do you see happening to the Republican Party post-Trump?
Well, I mean, I think that it's going to depend on the fallout, obviously, and the fallout is going to be driven by. It really is up to the people who held their nose and voted for Trump what happens next. The people who are never Trump, and who said this is not our standard of behavior, this is not our standard of politics. We can't alienate every woman, every minority, and every young person in America and be a successful political movement. And we can't do it on the basis of a guy who's immoral and not conservative. Those people have already made their stand. The people who were very ardently in favor of Trump, as I keep mentioning Hannity and Ingram because I think they're the best examples, but the people who are in the primaries stumping for Trump, those people have already made their stand. The question is going to be, for the people in the middle, the people who voted for Trump but held their nose while doing so, they said, okay, well, I have to. I just don't have a choice. Hillary Clinton's the other candidate. It's a binary election. Again, logic I find compelling but not completely persuasive. What are those people going to do? Are they going to say that this is the fault of the people who wouldn't vote for Trump, that Trump lost? Are they going to say this is the fault of the people who were pushing Trump in the primaries, and that's why Trump lost? Are they going to blame the establishment because that's the all-purpose this sort of all-purpose whipping boy is the establishment, and I think that there's blame to go. I think there's blame to go around in all these directions. But I don't want a firefight. This is the difference between the people in Never Trump and the people in and again, it's always so weird to say the people in Never Trump. It's not a movement. Right? We don't have meetings. Right? It's a bunch of individuals who decided personally, I'm not voting for Trump. Some people like this.
There's big differences within Never Trump.
There's huge differences. I mean, there's people like Brett Stevens who are actually voting for Hillary Clinton, right? There are people like me who would never vote for Hillary Clinton if you put a gun to my head. There are people who are voting for. There are people who don't like Trump based on kind of persona issues, like Jeb Bush. There are people who aren't voting for Trump who don't really care about the persona issues so much. They care about the vile things he says, but not about the brashness per se. I don't care about his brashness; it doesn't bother me. But who think that he's not conservative and that he represents bad policy. Like, there's a broad diversity of opinion for people who aren't voting Trump. So to call it a movement is really that's flattering it in a way that it doesn't deserve to be flattered. It's not a movement. So, but that said, to determine what happens next, I don't know anyone who is not voting for Trump who wants a firefight within the party. I don't, by contrast, know anyone who's ardent about Trump, who really likes Trump, who doesn't want a firefight. They're desperate for the firefight. They need the firefight because they have to justify why the guy that they picked, they got their man. They have to justify why he lost so badly, and so they have to blame that on someone else. And that's why you're saying, like, I'm not interested in doing recriminations after this election so much. I think that we have to do some soul searching. We have to correct some mistakes, but I'm not so much interested in the blame game for people who I think made honest mistakes and did things wrong. But people like Hannity are already prepping for afterward. I'm going to, then we're going to open up the guns on everyone. And it's like, why because how does this bring success? What's your plan for success? Is this your plan to stop the left? Is your plan to stop Hillary Clinton to tear apart the party from the inside? I mean, we're actually going to need to work together to do something to stop the left, as opposed to nominating a leftist along fractured party basis and then ramming him down everybody's throat.
I do know of some Never Trumpers. I consider myself a Never Trumper as well, who want some type of
who want some people to burn in the fire. But
Jamie Kirchick, for instance, put a list of 25 people that should not have their careers after the election. You mentioned Hannity and Ingram. I mean, should they be in positions of prominence for the conservative?
It's not a matter of should. I think that people should give a hard look to whether they were told the truth by Hannity and Ingram, and then decide, is this somebody who I want to trust with sort of messaging for the future of the conservative movement? I think in certain areas, sure, but only when they're talking about principle, not when they're talking about politicians, clearly, and determine whether the principle is what's motivating them or the political loyalty. As far as kind of recriminations generally, what I'm talking about is less about specific figures than it is about the broad-based populace. Like, I'm not interested in blaming people who vote Trump. Like, this idea that there are a lot of people who are big Trump backers who are preemptively saying about people who are not voting for Trump, you guys are just on your high horse. Stop looking down your nose at us. I'm not looking down my nose at you. In fact, you people are looking down your nose at me. You're saying I'm Laura Ingraham went on national TV and said that I'm in favor of partial birth abortion if I don't vote for the guy who backed Planned Parenthood and was for partial birth abortion until 5 minutes ago. I mean, when it comes to recriminations, again, I think Kirchick is a bit of an outlier, but blaming the Trump voter, I think there are a few people who want to do that. I'm not interested in doing that because I think the vast majority of Trump voters are doing it for what they perceive to be good reasons. I perceive my own reasons to be good. We can have an honest difference of opinion about that. But moving forward, we're going to have to make sure that the people that we nominate, we do based on principle, not based on celebrity or based on feeling or based on rage. And we're going to have to find some new nominees, some people who are actually capable of making a moral argument, not just being accountants like Paul Ryan.
I'm going to ask you about the future kind of candidates in a second. But let me just press you, since you brought up Brett Stevens for a moment. He's voting for Hillary. Yeah. I've said that if I was in a swing state, I'd vote for